Do you have a marriage-based green card application? Have you filed it on your own, or are you filing with an attorney? Either way, you're going to be scheduled for an interview. And now it's more important than ever that you are prepared for your interview. So if it's a marriage-based green card application, so that means that you married a U.S. citizen spouse and now they've petitioned for you and you've probably been admitted and paroled, or you have been admitted and paroled, because that's the only way you can do an adjustment of status while you're in the United States. Now you've been scheduled for the interview and you are going to be going to the interview where they're going to ask you a bunch of questions about your marriage to make sure that it's a real marriage, also known as a bona fide marriage. So if they suspect for any reason that they think it's a fraud marriage, then there's serious consequences to that. You want to avoid for them to possibly think that you are in a fraud marriage, because if they do, they can separate you. I just recently had this happen. It's called a Stokes interview. We went into the interview. To be fair, the clients hadn't been able to provide a lot of bona fide marriage documents for this case, but we had submitted a good bit. The officer was early morning, got hung up on because there's children that both of them have outside the marriage to each other. The officer got hung up on why one of the parents were not listed as emergency contact from one of the other children. So they were scrambling, they were nervous, they were trying to get this document to show it on the phone to the officer, and the officer kind of started to keep making them feel more nervous. He was being unreasonably aggressive. I've been to hundreds of these interviews before, and this was one of them where I just felt like the officer at 7 a.m. in the morning was being unreasonable, and it seemed like it was intentional that he was trying to make him feel nervous. And so at that point, I just, as they continued to shuffle through their phone and try to show it to the officer, then the officer insisted that we upload it online, because that is something you should be doing, by the way, is that you want to upload any new bona fide marriage documents that you have into the portal. There's an online portal. You can upload it on as evidence instead of taking it with you to the interview. Of course, you should do both, actually. You should upload it and take it with you to the interview, just in case the officer wants to see it, but they do like that you've scanned it in there. But getting back to this point, the officer then insisted that we scan it that same day. I told him that I honestly had never seen an officer be so fixated on a single document, because there's a totality of circumstances as the standard. So it's not just like one document that makes or breaks the fact that this is a real bona fide marriage or not. So the officer was a little offended by that, and then he continued to then go on about that one issue, and then after that was like, okay, we're gonna separate you, so you're gonna stay here, ma'am, and the husband had to go outside. At that point, because of the way he just had been, I asked to speak to the supervisor. Supervisor came in. Of course, between that time that I was there and the time that he went to bring the supervisor, I was, of course, told the supervisor that I was interrupting the interview, because attorneys are not technically supposed to be talking during the interview, but we do have a right to actually interject when we feel like something's going wrong or the officer's being unreasonable. So don't let officers kind of pigeonhole you into thinking that you cannot say anything at all during the interview. Fortunately, I've been to hundreds of these interviews, and I knew at that point that this officer is just being unreasonable. 9 out of 10 officers, to be fair, are really nice and reasonable, but this officer, for whatever reason that morning, was not being reasonable. So the supervisor came. He made my complaint about the officer being fixated on a single document and not being imported. The supervisor acknowledged that and acknowledged that there's other documents that you can file, and that if there is any documents, that they can issue a request for evidence, so we don't need to keep talking about that. After that, the officer that was conducting the interview was allowed to continue the interview. However, then the officer was obviously clearly emotional, and the fact that he was emotional basically made it seem like he was out to get them. So when he started the interview, you're supposed to ask about 20 questions. This guy, within one question, asked probably about 20 questions. The way he was wearing a mask, he was like hiding behind his mask. He just seemed very angry for whatever reason. It just seemed very personal. So at that point, I asked to stop the interview. The supervisor came in. We asked the supervisor to have another officer complete the interview. The supervisor was nice enough to grant that request. We went out, we waited. The clients were nervous, of course. We waited, we got called back in. The officer came in. He still separated them, and he still asked 20 questions from one of them, and then had the other person come back and ask the same 20 questions. Those questions, basically the answers have to basically match almost each other or be very similar, or you'll be allowed an opportunity to explain any inconsistencies between those answers. But the demeanor of the officer and just the way he conducted it, even though it was very thorough and he made sure that they proved that they're in a real marriage, he was just treating them a lot better. And the fact that I was there, I was able to do that. I feel bad for somebody if they go by themselves, if they're going to be subject to this. This is how cases get denied or they get delayed for several months. And and you could be waiting for several months to get a decision. So now more than ever, it's important that you do get prepared for your interview and that you do go with an attorney. Obviously, there's ICE arrests being made at USCIS offices too. Not that an attorney can necessarily stop an ICE officer from arresting an applicant if they have a right to do that, but the chances are going to be less. And so make sure that you are being vetted, make sure that you are being asked the questions for eligibility and being prepared for your interview, because you do need to at least know what to expect when you go to the interview and the possibilities of being arrested or possibly being separated and being conducted a Stokes interview. This case was approved the same day after the interview. Probably 19 out of 20 cases that I've gone to in the last month or so, they don't get approved the same day. So this went from a case that I saw that would be issued a request for evidence, probably delayed, to a case that was approved the same day. So that was a victory for these clients. Happy that I was able to help them. If you guys ever need any assistance, you can go to rodarmandelaw.com and reach out to me. Have a nice day.